What if the moment your heart gave out was the moment your soul truly woke up? The heat clung to the outskirts of Brayfield like a worn-out memory. On the edge of this quiet town, a temporary stage stood among dry soil and dreams unfinished. A crowd gathered, not for spectacle, but for the possibility that something better might rise from the dust. A faded banner fluttered above them. Together, we shape the future. Caleb Rains stood under that banner, not as a savior, but as a symbol. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his posture rehearsed, his smile almost convincing. He spoke of education, of equal beginnings, of a school not yet built, but already filled with imagined future. Some in the crowd nodded, some only listened, because they had nothing else to do. Hope in towns like Brayfield had learned not to speak too loudly, but then he paused, not for effect, not for drama, for breath. Something inside him clenched tight, sharp, unmistakable. His hand gripped the podium, his smile flickered, a single bead of sweat slid down his temple. He opened his mouth to speak again, but the words never came. His knees buckled, his body folded like paper. Gasps rose like wind, and the billionaire fell right in front of them. Calls for help cracked through the air. Phones fumbled. Panic spread. No sirens came. There were none in Brayfield, just a pickup truck and urgency. They loaded him in the back and drove fast. Not to a hospital, but to a place that tried its best to act like one Brayfield community clinic. Was T designed for moments like this? Its paint peeled at the edges. Its machines were few and far between. But what it lacked in modernity, it held in heart. The doors slammed open. He is crashing. And then she stepped forward. Elia Monroe wasn't Sabam. What people expected from a town doctor. She looked young, barely out of school. Small, serious, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. But the room shifted when she moved. She didn't ask who he was. She only asked how long they had. Chest pain collapsed, pulse fading. She leaned over him, pressed her fingers to his neck, felt the uneven rhythm, struggling beneath skin. Her voice was clear, calm. This is a massive cardiac arrest. Likely left, anterior, descending, artery. Nurse Ruth, older, wiser, maybe a little afraid, spoke up. We didn't have what we need for this. We didn't have time for what we done to need, Aaliyah replied. Another nurse. Connie hesitated. You've never done this alone. Elia didn't. Blink. If I don't try, he dies. If I do, maybe he lives. That's all I need to know. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then Ruth slowly handed her the tray. Let's get to work. You've never done this alone. The words weren't too cruel. They were simply honest, spoken with the kind of weight that came from watching others fail before, but Elia Monroe didn't flinch. Her voice was low, steady. If I stand here and do nothing, he dies. If I act, there's a chance. That's enough for me. Silence clung to the walls. One of the assistants muttered under his breath, We are about to lose the biggest donor this town's ever seen, to a rookie. Elia turned, meeting his eyes with quiet fire. I'm not thinking about his name. I'm thinking about his heart, and giving up right in front of us. For a beat, no one moved. Then Ruth sighed, reached for the emergency tray, and placed it in Elia's hands, then let S save him. The room transformed. Hesitation turned into motion. Fear turned into purpose. Elia took the lead, not with bravado, but with something rarer, conviction rooted in care. There was no cath lab, no fancy machines, just a young doctor and a fading pulse. She crushed the clot-dissolving medication with trembling hands, adjusted the oxygen, ran the portable EKG with fingers that didn't dare shake. Every beep from the monitor was a whisper she refused to ignore. 30 minutes passed, then 45, and then a single solid tone, a stable rhythm. Elia exhaled her body, suddenly aware of how long it had been. Holding its breath, color crept back into Caleb. Rain's face, his chest rose evenly. Now, he says stable, she said softly. The room went quiet. Ruth studied her for a moment, unreadable, then gave a slow, quiet nod. You just saved his life. Elia, didn't he celebrate? She didn't smile. She looked at the man lying unconscious before her. So powerful in the world outside this room, so fragile here, and whispered under her breath, let's hope he wakes up with a heart worth saving. He woke to the scent of antiseptic and the faint hum of flickering lights. His chest ached, his mouth was dry. The world around him felt dim, like someone had turned down the volume on reality. He tried to move. A wave of dizziness pinned him down. A voice to his right. Calm, clear, no kindness, but no coldness either. Just control, you just had a heart attack. He turned his head slowly. A woman stood beside him. Young, straight-backed, clipboard in hand, her hair tied back her face, unreadable. No awe, no fear, no trace of who he was. In her eyes, what happened? He managed to rasp. You collapsed yesterday, at the school site. You were brought here. There was no time to transfer you. We did what we had to do. You saved me. I led the procedure, she said, eyes still on the chart. He blinked. Thank you, really I am. Caleb Rains. She didn't look up. We figured that out from your ID. A weak laugh escaped him. He winced. So you do know who I am? I know your name, she replied flatly. That's all I need? Caleb paused. He was used to people recognizing more than just his name, used to admiration, headlines, handshakes, but this woman, she seemed utterly unmoved. I am sorry, he said. Attempting charm. I didn't catch. Yours, Elia Monroe. Well, Dr. Dusker. Monroe, thank you again, she gave a slight nod. No warmth, just duty. You don't seem particularly happy about it, he added, brow furrowed. She finally met his gaze, one brow arching. Would you prefer a parade? He chuckled awkwardly. No. It is just most people, Don? Speak to me like this. I'm not most people. Caleb tilted his head, intrigued now. There was a long pause. He studied her. No awe, no reverence, no interest in his wealth or story, just a quiet wall. He suddenly wanted to understand. I came here to build a school, Caleb said, his voice softer now, like he was speaking not to defend himself, but to explain something he hadn't quite figured out. Yet I wanted to see it through. That is why I came to Brayfield. I know, Elia replied, placing her clipboard down on the cold edge of the metal table. She didn't raise her voice, but the quiet weight in it was louder than any accusation. You don't sound convinced, he said. She turned slightly, not out of irritation, but because the words had been living inside her for too long. We've had men like you here. Before, she said, big plans, generous promises, a photo op, a banner in the wind, the beginning of something beautiful. Her eyes flicked back to his. And then you disappear and we're the ones left with half a building and dreams that never even got drywall. Caleb opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He wasn't offended. He was disarmed. I'm not like them, he managed, almost offensive. A faint smile touched her lips, one that wasn't cruel, just tired. They all say that, he swallowed, unsure how to bridge the gap between his intention and her memory of men like him. The space between them felt suddenly thick, not with resentment, but something heavier, something called experience. I know you're kind, Mr. Rains, she continued, her voice low but calm. You mean, well, I don't doubt that, but this town doesn't need another spotlight. It needs someone who, one, walk away when the camera shuts off. That pierced more than she could have known. He'd effaced hostile boards, ruthless interviewers, but this wasn't he. This was personal. And worse, she wasn't wrong. He sank back into the thin pillow behind him. The pressure in his chest, not from his heart, this time, but from the unfamiliar ache of shame. Elia glanced at the monitor, scribbled something quickly on her chart, then turned toward the door. You should rest, she said, her voice gentler now. I'll check on you later. Just before she stepped out, he called after her. Do you treat all your patients this way? She paused without turning. Only the famous ones. The next morning, Caleb learned he'd be staying at the clinic for at least 10 days. Dr. Elia Monroe had made that very clear. Your heart's still fragile, she said. And next time, you might not collapse in front of someone as stubborn as me, he tried to laugh, tried to find that old charm that usually chipped away at people's edges, but she had already moved on, and so for the first time in years, he stayed still. No calls, no press, no private jets, or board meetings. Just the slow tick of a hallway clock, the creak of tired floorboards, and the quiet hum of old ceiling fans. On the second day, he made a decision. No more titles, no more reminders, just Caleb. Room 3. A man with a broken heart and a borrowed robe. Most of the staff didn't know him. Most of the town wouldn't have cared if they did. This place wasn't wired to Wall Street. Here he was in tea. News, and for once he found that comforting. He watched Elia from a distance. There was something magnetic in the way she moved, efficient, measured, focused with the elderly man. In room 2, she bent down to examine a swollen ankle, but lingered to ask about the roses his wife used to plant. With the young mother down the hall, she offered to hold the baby while the woman took her first shower in days. But with him, still just Caleb, she was different, polite, distant, not cold, but untouched, like she'd built a wall just high enough to keep him from knocking twice. No small talk, no lingering eye contact. She treated his body, not his presence. At first, he mistook it for indifference, but then he noticed the way she paused just a second longer at his monitor, the way her eyes flicked back to his room even after she'd walked away, the way she always knew without being told when his pain was about to spike. She wasn't cold. She was careful, and somewhere beneath that caution, there was something else entirely. There was a boy who hated eating. 6 years old, sharp-eyed, stubborn as a mule, but Elia always had an extra granola bar in her scrub pocket just for him. She never said why. She just handed it over when the nurse gave up trying. It was these small things that began to show Caleb the truth. She wasn't a distant. She was deliberate, and beneath her calm, there was something else. A weight she carried so quietly, most people missed it. A kind of fatigue that didn't just come from long shifts or sleepless nights. It came from knowing too much, too soon. He found himself wondering about her, so he asked Ruth, the nurse, who always had a quiet story if you knew how to listen. She came straight here after med school, Ruth said one morning, adjusting a drip line. Could be gone to Chicago, New York, anywhere. But she chose Brayfield. She paused, her gaze drifting to the window, said this town had stories no one wanted to hear, said she was tired of noise. Caleb looked out that same window, later, past the gravel path, and out to the endless fields where sky and soil met. Something about that silence settled inside him, like a question he didn't yet know how to ask. She doesn't talk much, he said quietly. She used to, Ruth replied. Before the last school project fell apart, her voice dipped lower. Everyone was so hopeful. There was a ribbon, a ceremony, hats for the kids, and then it just stopped. No warning, no building. Just empty land and broken promises. Caleb felt his chest tighten. Not from healing wounds, but something older, deeper. She was a teenager when it happened. Ruth added, voice heavy now. She doesn't hate hope, Caleb. She just hates liars. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the paint. He had never thought of his presence as a burden before. His name usually opened doors, but here it closed them. Here it wasn't. To a gift, it was a ghost. The next day, he watched her again. Aaliyah was stitching up a boy sauce knee, humming something soft beneath her breath. Later, she was at the pharmacy, arguing firmly to get an old man's insulin covered. And then he saw her laugh, a real laugh, when a little girl called her Dr. Robot. But with him, she stayed distant. No jokes, no kindness beyond what was necessary. And yet Caleb noticed the way her hand lingered, half a second longer, on his IV. The way she glanced back after leaving the room, just once, almost imperceptibly. She wasn't cold, she was guarded. And that mystery, that quiet strength, began to draw him in more than any spotlight ever had. He started asking gentle questions, not to win her over, but to understand her. Do you always hum when you are stitching? What does your name mean? Did you always want to be a doctor? Sometimes she answered briefly, sometimes she didn't. But little by little, the air between them softened. Her shoulders relaxed, ever so slightly. Her eyes, once evasive, began to hold his, just a bit longer. He wasn't sure if she liked him, but he knew one thing. She had become the one person he couldn't stop thinking about. Not because she saved him, because she didn't need to care who he was, and still, somehow, he hoped she would. One evening, he found her behind the clinic, sitting on a low stone wall by the garden. The sun was slipping behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of lavender and fire. She sat alone, arms folded, expression unreadable. He approached quietly, his heart, though healing, beat with an unfamiliar nervousness. Mind some company, he asked. She didn't look at him right away. Then she shrugged. Free country. He sat beside her, careful to leave enough space. They listened to the night, begin crickets, tuning their song, wind rustling through the garden beds. You're a mystery, Dr. Monroe, he said, voice low. She glanced sideways. That's intentional? He offered a half smile. You treat everyone here like they matter. You stay late. You fight for them. But with me, like you, the already decided who I am. I have, she said. No hesitation, he frowned. Why? Her jaw clenched, then softened. She looked straight ahead. Because I've seen your kind smiles, cameras, speeches full of promise, then nothing but silence. She turned toward him, now her voice sharper. No camera crew, huh? He shook his head. No camera crew. But he knew this wasn't about cameras. It was about trust and everything broken that had come before him. But there was a promise, wasn't it there? Elias' voice didn't rise, but there was something in it that struck harder than anger ever could. Caleb's. Berjrith caught for a moment, then slowly he nodded. I didn't make promises I can keep, he said, his voice quieter now. Good, she replied, though her tone tightened, because the last man who did left behind more than just broken plans. She didn't speak right away. For a few seconds, the garden faded into the hush of crickets and distant wind. Then she leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, like she was holding something delicate, something painful. I was 13, her words landed like rain on dry ground. You collapsed on the same spot where we once held a ceremony, same field, same setup, same ribbon. Waiting to be cut, her voice wasn't bitter. It was reverent, almost like she was walking back into a moment that had never truly let her go. A man stood on that stage, said he'd build us the best school the county had ever seen. I remember how proud my mom looked. I was wearing my nicest dress, holding a balloon that said, "Tomorrow starts today." Caleb felt his smile vanish. They gave us hats with the school S logo, she continued. They even dug the foundation. She paused, and then nothing. The trucks stopped coming. The workers disappeared. No explanation. We waited. That summer, that fall, that winter, then the weeds came, and every day we still walked 2 miles, to a broken-down school with mold on the walls and a leaky roof, she turned to look at him. But her gaze wasn't angry. It was far away, like she was staring at the 13-year-old version of herself, standing in that empty field. "We waited 3 years," she whispered, "and nothing ever came. Just silence." Caleb's throat tightened. His hands gripped the stone wall beneath him. "That's why I don't believe in you," she said, not harshly, but with aching clarity. "Not just you, all of you. The ones who think good intentions are enough, who show up, give a speech, shake some hands, and leave us to explain to the kids why the banners meant nothing." He looked down at the dirt beneath his shoes. He had never been told a story from this side of the microphone. Not like this. He had never been made to feel small in a way that was right. "I never meant to be like that," he said, voice low maybe not. Ilya replied gently. "But meaning well isn't it the same as doing right?" They sat in silence, not uncomfortable, just heavy with truth. Then he asked, "Why did you stay after all that?" She took a deep breath, as if the answer had been waiting to be spoken for years. "Because I couldn't leave the place that showed me what was broken. And maybe if I stayed long enough, I could become the kind of doctor I needed." Back then, Caleb turned fully to face her now. There was admiration in his eyes, and guilt, and something else. A quiet longing for purpose, for redemption. "I've done a lot in my life," he said. "Some of it good, a lot of it loud. But this might be the first time someone is made me feel small in a way that matters." She looked at him again. This time her eyes were a little softer, less guarded. Then maybe she said quietly, "You're not so bad after all." And for the first time, Aaliyah didn't look away. The morning Caleb was discharged from Brayfield Clinic, everyone expected him to disappear by noon. That was the pattern. Arrive with noise leave, without consequence. But he didn't leave. Instead, he requested a meeting with the town's building supervisor, a few school teachers, and parents who had long stopped hoping for anything new. When someone asked him why he was still in town, he gave a simple answer. "I need to reassess the soil before we build. Some things didn't sit right, and maybe they didn't, but no one questioned it. Not yet." Some people nodded politely, others raised eyebrows. A few whispered behind coffee cups, already predicting he'd vanish before the foundation dried. When Aaliyah heard the rumor, Caleb still in town. Poking around the construction plans, she said nothing, just raised a single eyebrow. But she didn't ask questions, and the truth, he wasn't lying, not exactly. Yes, he planned to reassess the blueprints, but something far deeper had shifted inside him, something Ilya had stirred without even meaning to. He no longer wanted to build a school for the cameras, or for the headlines. He wanted to build it for them, and if he was honest, he wanted to build it for her. Each morning, Caleb left the small room he rented above the old hardware store, notebook in hand, and walked the dust-streaked roads of Brayfield. No assistants, no suits, no schedule. He sat with families in crumbling kitchens and listened. He visited classrooms where the ceilings sagged and the books were older than the students. He played soccer in bare feet with kids who asked for colors, not computers. "Can we have swings that dawn to squeak? Can we paint dragons on the walls? Can we have a reading treehouse?" He didn't laugh. He just wrote it all down. When an older man said, "You city boys always come here thinking you're saviors," Caleb only nodded. When a tired mother said, "They always promise wheelchair ramps." But forget the wheelchairs, he didn't explain. He just listened, and then Ilya saw him again. It was by accident. She'd just finished rounds and was cutting across the library lot when she spotted him cross-legged on the porch of the community center, completely surrounded by 3 children, each waving hand-drawn sketches like blueprints for wonder. He was sketching back, a dragon-tail slide, a treehouse reading nook, swings that didn't squeak. She stood there longer than she meant to, just watching. Something in her chest shifted, but she didn't yet know what. The next day, Caleb showed up at the clinic, not for treatment this time, but with a quiet question. I need someone with medical knowledge to help design the school. His first aid room. Think you could spare a few hours? She narrowed her gaze, instinctively, guarded. You are really doing this. He nodded, not for the headlines, just for them. She studied his face, searching for ego for an angle. There was none, just the truth, so she said yes. What began as a quick consultation turned into something more. Suddenly, she was sitting through meetings about nutrition, programs, trauma-informed classrooms, mental health services, and Caleb, he listened, deeply, fully. He didn't pretend to know more. He didn't interrupt. He honored her knowledge, and that alone began to unspool something quietly tangled inside her. For so long, she had been the only one fighting for these children, and now someone else was finally showing up. One afternoon, they walked together across the future school site. This time, there were no photo ops, just permits, soil reports, and a local contractor, Elia, actually trusted. She stopped and looked around. You could be just written a check and vanished. Caleb brushed the dirt off his jeans, smiling. I'm not most people. She gave him a look. You used to be? He laughed, soft and real. Yeah, I think I did. They stood in silence as the trees rustled in the afternoon breeze. The sun was low, casting long golden shadows over the open land where walls would soon rise. After a long pause, Elia asked the question she hadn't let herself voice before. Why this town? Why stay? Caleb turned to her slowly, and for the first time his answer came without hesitation. Because someone here told me that meaning well isn't enough, he said, voice low, and I want to be the kind of man who proves her wrong good intentions, Caleb had said, aren't enough. People like me, we show up with half a plan, and sometimes we end up doing more damage than good. Then he looked at her, not for approval, but for honesty. And I want to be the man who proves you wrong. Elia didn't smile. Not quite, but something in her eyes softened the smallest shift in a long, closed door. Maybe she said, yes, you already are. That night back at the clinic, Judith raised an eyebrow the moment Elia walked in. You've been out with the billionaire again. Elia took off her coat slowly, the scent of dust and wind still clinging to the fabric. He's not acting like one, she said, almost to herself. Judith smirked. Let me know when he starts building the moon. Elia didn't respond. She just reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, the blueprint, the one Caleb had given her, smudged by pencil, fingerprints and childlike scrawl. Crayon notes in the margins, dragon slide, treehouse nook music room, with stars on the ceiling. It wasn't flawless, but for the first time in years, it looked real. The storm came quietly, at first, just a whisper of rain on the rooftops, like nature clearing its throat. But by nightfall, Brayfield was under siege. The wind howled like grief, and the river bloated and furious, tore through its banks. Roads caved in, trees buckled, windows shattered. The sky cracked open, with lightning that lit the town like a warning. By midnight, the clinic had lost power. By 2, the ceiling leaked. By 3, part of the roof was gone. Ilya moved through chaos, soaked to the bone. Flashlight clenched between her teeth, one hand pressing gauze to a bleeding forehead, the other waving for help. She shouted over the wind, voice hoarse but steady. Move them downstairs, stabilize the IVs, get blankets. Then the back door slammed open. She spun around expecting more rain. Instead, it was Caleb. Dripping, shaking mud clinging to his jeans. One arm held a small child, tight against his chest. The other dragged a bag of medical supplies through water. You are not supposed to be here, she yelled. I found 2 kids in a flooded house, he shouted back. By the bridge, their mamas still up on the roof. I told the rescue crew where Ilya. He added almost breathlessly. My heart's still beating. She stared at him, wrenched. Wild-eyed, and something shifted again. Not awe, not fear, disbelief wrapped in quiet wonder. "Get them inside," she barked, and he did. That night became a war zone. They worked side by side. No time for doubt. No space for roles, just instinct and grit. They dragged sandbags across doorways, splinted a broken leg with torn wood, cleared debris to make way for emergency crews. Caleb didn't stop. Not even when the wind shoved him sideways, not when his palms blistered, not even when Ilya caught him pressing a hand to his chest, just a second too long. "You need to sit down," she told him. Later, he muttered. By sunrise, the storm had passed, but the town looked hollowed. Roads torn open, trees downed, lives shaken loose from their routines, and Caleb, he was burning with fever. She found him collapsed on a cot, in the corner of the clinic near the supply room, his blanket-soaked skin pale and cold. She knelt beside him, pushed wet hair from his forehead, and whispered, "You stubborn, stupid man." His eyes fluttered open, glazed but aware. "We saved them, right?" He rasped. "Yes," she said, her voice soft now. "We did. But now you are the one I have to save." He tried to smile, failed. The cough took over before he could say more. "Aliyah," she called out, her voice sharp again. Judith and 2 nurses came running. They worked fast. IV fluids, dry blankets, vitals. Caleb's body had finally given in to the night. It refused to rest through. He'd pushed himself past every warning sign, and now it was her turn to carry him. They moved quickly. Blankets, fluids, vitals. Caleb's body had been pushed too far, his already fragile heart now strained under exhaustion, exposure and dehydration. His skin was cold, his breathing shallow. His body, once so used to commanding rooms, was now simply trying to survive. That night, the clinic pulsed with a dim, eerie quiet. The emergency lights hummed softly. Patients were curled up on cots, on floors, anywhere dry. Nurses took turns, resting heads tucked into folded arms between rounds, but Aliyah never left his side. She sat in an old metal chair pulled close to his bed, one hand gently resting on his arm, the other holding a damp cloth she used to press against his fevered skin. She watched him in silence, every twitch of his eyelids, every staggered breath. At one point, when no one else was near, she whispered, "You idiot." Not cruel, not even angry, just deeply human. "You could have died again." Caleb did not answer. He was far away, lost in a kind of sleep that looked like surrender, but wasn't he? He was still fighting. She could feel it. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The wind was gone. But inside, something else lingered, a kind of stillness. Heavy with all the things they hadn't said, by morning the fever broke, his breath steadied, his eyes blinked open slowly. And the first thing he saw was her, still there. Hair a mess, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She hadn't moved. "You stayed," he rasped. Aliyah leaned forward, not even trying to hide the emotion in her voice. "You think I'd leave after everything you just pulled?" He gave a weak smile. "Would have been justified." She shook her head. "You didn't have to do all that. You could be left. No one would be blamed you. I couldn't," he said. Voice hoarse, but sure not. "While this town still needed hands, you almost broke yourself trying." Maybe he said, his eyes never leaving hers, but maybe that's what it takes to be the kind of man you believe in. Her chest tightened, her fingers twitched unsure. Then slowly, finally, she reached for his hand, and this time she didn't let go later. When he woke again, the world had softened. The storm had passed. The clinic had light again. Sunlight filtered through the windows, casting quiet gold across the floor. But inside, the air was still thick with everything that had been felt in silence. Ilya sat beside his bed, again arms crossed over her chest. A few strands of hair had escaped her ponytail, curling gently around her face. She noticed his eyes, open, and she straightened slightly. "Yuri back," she said softly. He gave a crooked smile. "Seems like I'm getting used to waking up to you." She rolled her eyes, but the corners of her lips twitched. Caleb looked at her, really looked, then said, his voice rough and real, "You are the first person I've met in a very long time who didn't look at me with awe." Her brow furrowed, but she didn't speak. "That's a good thing," he added. "It's honest. You didn't flatter me. You didn't need anything from me. You looked me in the eye and told me the truth. Even when it was the last thing I wanted to hear." Elia didn't respond, but something in her posture softened. Caleb took another breath, steadier now. "You're also the first person who's made me want to do something right. Not for my name, not for legacy, just because it's, right." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, dense with meaning. Elia finally looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "You scared me that night." "I know," Caleb said. "I scared myself too." When she looked back up, something was different in her eyes, still guarded but no longer distant. "I want to believe in people," she said, "but it's hard. When you've been let down, not just by strangers, but by the ones who were supposed to stay." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'm not asking you to believe in me. Not yet. Just maybe give me the chance to keep showing up." For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly, deliberately, she leaned forward and adjusted the blanket over his shoulders. Not a word more, but the gesture said everything. Elia tucked the blanket over his shoulder with quiet care. "Rest," she whispered. "You will need your strength." "For what?" he asked, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. She didn't look at him. "For a ribbon cutting." 2 weeks later, Brayfield gathered again in the same dusty field, but this time it was different. There was no platform, no press, no suits sharp enough to slice the wind. Just people, families in their Sunday best. Kids with shoes cleaned the night before. Parents holding hands, teachers dabbing at their eyes before anyone noticed. And behind them, a school, a real one, with walls and windows that opened, and laughter echoing before the doors even unlocked. There were desks and books, chalkboards and colored maps, a playground with swings that didn't creak. A tiny library filled with stories, many of them sent by strangers who had heard what had happened in Brayfield and decided to believe in something real. Caleb didn't stand. At the front, no speech, no name tag, just a button-down shirt and jeans, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. They all knew who he was, but they also knew what he'd done. He'd stayed. They'd seen him hauling bricks, wiping sweat from his brow, crouched in corners during planning meetings, knocking on doors to ask what they needed, not what he thought they should want. He wasn't the man from the magazine anymore. He was Caleb, the one who showed up. The mayor gave a short speech. The principal spoke of community of second chances, and then came the part Elia had secretly dreaded. They handed her the scissors. Her hand trembled. Just slightly. She stepped forward, took a breath, and before cutting the ribbon, she turned. There he was, standing at the back, watching, not smiling, just present. Their eyes met. And in that instant, everything. The years of disappointment, the quiet ache of broken promises, the buried hope rose and released all at once. She looked back at the ribbon and cut. The crowd erupted in applause. Children ran ahead like joy, released from years of waiting. Doors opened wide. Teachers led students inside into a school finally made just for them. Elia stepped back, blinking fast. Tears blurred her vision. She tried to catch them too late, but then he was there. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply stood beside her, not too close, not too far, then handed her a folded handkerchief. She took it, smiled through her tears. "You did it." He shook his head. "No," he said gently. "We did." They stood there, side by side, as the schoolyard filled with laughter, and for the first time in years, Elia let herself believe something she hadn't dared believe in. A long time. Maybe not everything built on hope has to fall apart. Some things can stay. A year later, Brayfield was no longer the town Caleb had first driven into the school. Brayfield Elementary stood proud in the morning light. Its red brick walls glowed in the sun, children's voices echoed in the hallways. The library was never quiet. The swings were never still. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a promise, finally kept. Elia Monroe, now officially, Dr. Monroe, had become head of the newly restored Brayfield Medical Center, right across from the school, a place she had once only imagined, now real, now hers. She led a small team of young driven healthcare workers, held free clinics twice a week. The kids called her Doc L. The elders brought her jam jars and stories from long ago. And she smiled more these days. As for Caleb, he never left. He sold parts of his company, kept a small team running things quietly. From afar, moved into a modest home just past the edge of town, taught a class on business basics every Wednesday in the school's art room because the chalkboards there smelled like fresh paint and purpose. Caleb became something of a fixture in Brayfield. He wasn't a symbol anymore, or a name, people whispered. He was just Mr. Mike, the man who brought books on Tuesday mornings, who baked cookies with the second graders, who helped oil the squeaky swing that just wouldn't stay quiet. Together, he and Ella became the quiet, steady heart of the town. Their love wasn't allowed. It didn't need to be. It grew like the roots of an old tree, deep unseen but unshakable. One afternoon in early spring, after a day filled with lesson plans, clinic notes, and children's laughter, Caleb asked Elia to walk with him. They wandered through the garden behind the school new blooms, breathing perfume into the soft air. They stopped beneath the almond tree, the one that had once sheltered them from a sudden summer storm. Elia reached up, fingers brushing a petal. Absently, Caleb turned to her, his voice low. I came here, thinking I'd build a school, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. But you taught me how to build a home. And then he knelt. In his hand was a simple silver ring, shining not with wealth, but with intention. Elia Monroe, he asked, will you marry me? She stared, breath caught, heart full. Then without a word, she knelt too, arms around him, voice trembling, yes. A month later, they were married in the courtyard of Brayfield Elementary. There were no press cameras, no designer suits, just children tossing flower petals, homemade banners, strung from fence to fence, laughter, joy pies, too many pies. Elia wore a simple white dress, her hair curled gently around her shoulders. Caleb waited beneath an arch of wild sunflowers and branches woven by the townsfolk. When she walked toward him, hands trembling, the applause rose and echoed off the school's new walls, and not a single dry eye remained. They danced under the stars to an old record player. The mayor gave a toast that made the whole town laugh. And when the music faded, Caleb and Ela walked home, barefoot, her heels. In one hand, his jacket over her shoulders, the night wrapping around them like a promise. 3 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Leah. She had her mother, Isai, quiet strength, and her father's wondering eyes. She loved story time on Caleb's lap and planting herbs in the clinic garden with Elia every morning. She ran to the schoolyard fence to wave at the older kids, and every night she insisted on the same bedtime story. Tell me the one where you built the school and found each other. Caleb wrote part-time, now a book on sustainable giving, not theory, but the kind lived between walls and faces and failures, turned into roots. Most of his time, though, that he spent helping Elia raising Leah, tending to the little life they had chosen to grow. At the front of Brayfield Elementary, just beside the flagpole, a simple wooden frame held a photograph. It was taken during the first spring festival, Caleb, Elia, and little Leah hand in hand, the school behind them, the sun casting a warm golden glow beneath the photo on a plaque he had carved the night of their wedding were the words, "A family is not built with bricks, but with hearts that stay, and stay they did." In a town once forgotten, two hearts had found their way through storms, through stillness, through every hard choice to keep showing up. Caleb had come looking for purpose, and in Brayfield he had found it. And in the end, it wasn't tea, bricks, or banners that mattered. It was what Elia had always known: presence, not promises, love, not legacy. Caleb came to build something, but what he found was far more than a school. He found the quiet power of staying, of showing up, and the truth that healing, real healing, often begins not with grand gestures, but with small, steady steps towards someone who refuses to give up. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of the beauty in choosing to care, to build, to believe, then you are already part of something bigger. At Shining Stories, we celebrate tales just like this. Stories of resilience, of kindness, of everyday people doing extraordinary things simply by staying when it matters most. So, if your heart is still listening, we invite you to walk with us through more stories that lift, mend, and remind us of the quiet magic in this world. Subscribe to Shining Stories for more true and tender moments that honor love, hope, and the grace of choosing to stay, because sometimes the stories that heal us begin with a heart that simply won't walk away. Thank you for being here, and remember, the world is still full of good people and even better stories.